This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I am your host, Jason Baum, and with me, as always, my co-hosts Marcus Merrill and Evelyn Coleman. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for coming back. It's like I make you come back. I'm glad you're back. How about that?
It's great.
And yeah.
Now I don't believe you.
And we have a special guest today. I'm really happy to bring on Lauren Maffeo. Lauren and I met at All Things Open last year. And Lauren, it's so great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I'm really excited to be here and to chat with you again after ATO.
Yes. So I started this new thing where now I say hello and let you say hello back, because like I used to just read bios, and then I feel like by the time we get to the actual like conversation, it's been 5 minutes and you still haven't said hello, and I felt bad. So that worked. That flowed well. We're gonna keep doing it that way.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And now I get to read your bio. So let me tell you who Lauren is. Lauren serves as the service designer at Steampunk, where she combines her expertise in design and tech to create impactful user experiences. She's the author of Designing Data Governance from the Ground Up, reflecting her deep commitment to responsible data management and governance. She's also a member of the editorial board of Springer's AI and Ethics Journal, contributing insights into ethical implications of artificial intelligence. And she imparts her knowledge as an adjunct lecturer on interaction design at George Washington University. I think that is so cool. I would absolutely sign up for your course, Lauren.
That's so nice of you. Thank you. I hope my students feel the same way.
I'm positive that students send us an email at community. No, just kidding. Tell us what you think. Well, Lauren, welcome to the podcast. And today we get to revisit a topic that we had a really in-depth discussion with Titus. Evelyn and I think, had that conversation with Titus on developers behaving badly report that Sauce Labs put out last year. And in that study, just as like a quick rehash, some big numbers, kind of surprising numbers were given. 77% of developers said they had taken on more testing responsibilities in the past year. And of those, 67% said that they were pushing to prod without testing, which was a very big number. 61% said that they were using untested code generated by ChatGPT. And more than a quarter of them did so regularly, which was very scarily. 70% said that they admitted to using a coworker's credentials. And gosh, so much, I guess, scary stats in that report. If you haven't had a chance, definitely give it a read. And so we wanted to revisit it. Lauren had seen the episode. I think I sent you the episode. And I was like, check this out. I think you would be interested. And you were like, we should definitely do something on like data governance and data ethics on like relating to like developers and this report. And I thought that was such a cool idea. So today we're going to be talking about data ethics and relating it back to the developers behaving badly report.
Yes,
Cool.
I'm very excited to do this. I will say as a caveat that I don't know of any relevant data behaving badly surveys. I don't, but if they do exist, I would love to read them, because my suspicion is that those practices you mentioned about code are 5 to 10-fold when it comes to data practices and what is or isn't being done. I am most shocked when we think about that survey Sauce Labs ran that people, it sounds like, freely admitted to doing these things, which that is pretty shocking to me. I mean, using a teammate's credentials in and of itself to presumably ship code and admitting to it is wild to me.
Absolutely wild, right? I mean, but then when we actually had that episode with Titus, he was like, actually, I'm not really surprised. Like, not surprised by the results, but yes, surprised that they openly admitted. I guess we did a good job of
It
saying
was
it was
anonymous, I
anonymous.
think. Yeah, it was like they
Yeah,
openly anonymously admitted it.
that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I am curious about that survey. Can you remind me what the consequences, if any, were? Did you include any questions in the survey about the consequences of using ChatGPT, the consequences of shipping under a colleague's name, the consequences of shipping code without testing? Because presumably all of that creates a lot of tech debt that you then have to resolve. And I'm curious what the consequences of those actions are, if any.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We actually
Okay.
Yeah, we actually did. Yeah, by the way, flipped it on us, which I like. uh, no, there wasn't in the report, but we did a lot of commentary after. We've done some art. There's been some articles that were written about the report where we gave some editorial reactions to it. On the podcast, we gave some reactions to it. I'd be curious, Marcus. And we haven't had the chance to kind of talk about the report. I'd be curious to get your take on Lauren's question.
I I suspect, and I don't know because we didn't ask direct questions. I suspect that the fact that they're freely and openly anonymously admitting it means that they haven't seen consequences yet. I think that people are probably the sharing credentials thing might actually be the least surprising thing to me because I think that we're so caught up in what I think you'd call performative security. So much of the security that we do engage with is unnecessary that it makes us apply those loose, it makes us sort of rebel against it in cases where we think it's overkill, even though it may not be overkill. And there's probably all sorts of data around the breaches that have happened as a direct result of people sharing credentials or leaving their laptop open when it gets stolen. But I cannot say I'm surprised by people using each other's credentials. I mean, and for one thing, I was working as a cloud Selenium grid maintainer doing, for quality assurance at a major e-commerce company. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that I had to do two-factor authentication or three-factor authentication just to log into Amazon Web Services 6 times a day, to the point where you're like, it is literally taking me 4 to 5 minutes to log into Amazon Web Services to make changes to my configuration. And it's taking me longer to log in than it is to do the change itself. And if I don't do anything for 15 minutes, I have to do it again. So it makes me not at all surprised that people are trying to do pretty much anything they can to get around it. And that's where I think Amazon is making you do performative security and not actually solving the problem. So I rant over. What do you think?
Oh, that's really interesting. So, as somebody who does systems and service design for the US federal government and is familiar with the truly tragic state of federal government IT, that really rings a bell to me. I'm very familiar with the auto log out after 20 minutes of needing to plug in hardware and a special card in order to access systems. And some of that I do think is necessary, but I also feel pretty strongly that the lack of technical acumen that we see in situations like the ones you and I are describing are due to lack of knowledge and expertise about the actual ways to keep your system secure. We know that there's a huge talent gap when it comes to cybersecurity roles and techniques, especially in industries like the federal sector. And so I think what happens is you end up with this horrendous customer experience. And in this case, your user is your colleague or your contractor in this case, which is myself, and you end up being the victim of that lack of expertise which exists inside the organization to make systems not only more secure but also more user friendly, because you only want to make users do the minimum to do the maximum, by which I mean you want them to do the least possible that they have to in order to securely access the system that they need. Because if you add in too much friction and design too much friction into the system, people find their own little workarounds. And I see that with data all the time because there isn't this singular well-constructed data architecture environment. And so that's why you have all of these spreadsheets that live on people's local machines. That's why you have this lack of data quality standards. It's why you don't have data defined. It's this lack of expertise and tooling at a centralized level that results in data flowing around everywhere. And I do think that most organizations today have not just too much data, but the issue of technical debt as it pertains to data is astronomical at this point. Astronomical to the point that it often, I think, feels unsolvable, even if it's not.
And I think people don't see the direct consequences of a misstep in this area clearly enough. And I guess one comparison I would draw is like why we have to put our phones in airplane mode when we get on an airplane. It's not because there might be interference with the system, which is what people think it is. It's because you're DDoSing all the cell towers that the plane is flying over and causing havoc with the system itself if you leave your phone on. People don't see that. So they think, I don't care. I'll just leave it on.
Exactly. And likewise, I'm seeing still this huge disconnect between data and AI, which is wild to me considering a few things. One, the fact that ChatGPT has officially made Gen AI mainstream in 2023. AI has, as we know, been around for well over half a century at this point. So it's not new, but what is new is the astronomical amount of data being produced and ingested by various systems, especially unstructured data like tweets, videos, photos, all of that. And so that allows people to not just use AI to create predictions about what might happen in the future. It also gives them the opportunity to create content that didn't exist before, aka deepfake content or content that is not real. But the reality is that AI at its core is data. And you cannot have AI without data, which is why data governance, I really believe, is the backbone of not just AI, but producing AI that is both accurate and ethical. I still have a really hard time convincing people, even in the data space, even in the tech world, that this is the case. I'm still seeing too much of a disconnect between the essence of good quality data and how to make it so, and then how to create AI that delivers any modicum of a return on investment, which the vast majority of it does not. And so that disconnect is still very real. I wonder where we will be in 5 years, but to your point about not seeing the consequences, I think we live with the consequences of poor AI and bad data every day, but there is still this gap between the perception of data and what's good data versus how it contributes to faulty AI.
Yeah, in the developers behaving badly report. Well, first of all, we called it developers behaving badly, right? One, and then there's the moniker that we included that people have of the lazy developer and chalking it up to that. Obviously, we defend the developer in there because we say like 77% of them all of a sudden have these new responsibilities that have been added to their plate and they're just overtaxed, overworked, and so shortcuts, right? And I would love to know what the equivalent is then for data, because is it that we're not seeing the? I mean, I hear about data breaches, I hear about things in the news, I hear about all this stuff, but it hasn't directly. Well, I'm sure it has directly impacted me, but I don't know about it, and so I'm blissfully unaware that someone in God knows what country probably has my social security and is running it right now on something. But yeah, I don't know. What is that on the data side? What is the equivalent?
That's a great question because I think about this a lot, especially as it pertains to the clientele that I work with, and it was top of mind for me as I was writing this book. And I think there are two scenarios that I tend to encounter the most when it comes to this question regarding data. The first scenario is the most common, and that is simply that there is no structure to the chief data office. The CDO role is new to a degree that still surprises me. I will talk to people who have been in IT careers of some sort for literally decades. And when I say, oh, I wrote this book for chief data officers, they'll cut me off and say, that's a job. And that happens more often than you would expect. And it always really kind of causes my jaw to drop, because I don't know how you could work in tech and not be aware of the astronomical effect that data is having on organizations. Because even if organizations don't use it correctly or well, they're still, for the most part, very aware of it and the need to utilize it effectively. And yet I still run into people who are surprised that the chief data officer role is a thing. And so there's that. And as a result of that, I think people still don't really realize what the chief data officer is supposed to do, which is to set a business strategy for successfully managing an organization's big data at scale, using the people, processes, and tools that will be most effective for your org. That's data governance. So the CDO is responsible for a governance strategy that can manage the organizational data at scale. Most organizations do not have that for various reasons. They either don't have somebody who is in the CDO role. They have data under the IT umbrella, and the IT organization and your average company does not have the time to devote to data in the way that they should. So it's most common for organizations to really lack the infrastructure for managing their data effectively. We all know that finding data scientists and data engineers, data architects is already incredibly challenging. And so very often there's a lack of talent in an organization, which is used to cohesively govern the data in a consistent way. But I also see organizations that do have the opposite. They do have a CDO, they have a chief data office. They might even have several different data teams in the organization. Like one team handles analytics, one team handles data science, one team handles data engineering. The challenge I often see in those organizations is that they are still doing data, but the governance part of it is missing from their work as the connective tissue. And so then what happens is that you have these 3 to 5 different data teams in an org who are all working on different things. They're all flying blind. They are viewed as the point people for data in the organization. So people are always coming to them with last minute requests. They very rarely have a service intake process to manage and categorize those requests the way developers often do. And so as a result of it, they still, even in those data roles, don't see the standards they're abiding by. They don't know often what quality data looks like. They are highly reactive rather than working in accordance with a strategy. And so even in cases where that CDO role exists and the talent is in the organization, I still see, even among data teams, too many silos as opposed to that inherent cross-functional collaboration, which is really what you need in order to make data governance work.
You caught me off guard. I also didn't know that was a position. You're finding out in the flesh.
You didn't think the chief data officer role was a position?
I'd never heard of it. I'm not shocked. Like, I don't know if what you meant by like people, you run into people who were like shocked. I'm not shocked that it is a thing, because once you mention it, it makes complete sense. And as you're talking, I'm thinking of dozens of scenarios where, if only my this could talk to that, if only I could have all these things in one place, so that so that everything could just be better, right? It really clicks, and it's one of those things where you learn and then you can never go back. Like, now that you've told us this is a thing, I'm forever changed. I can never go back to the Evelyn that was ignorant of the scope of data governance in an organization.
Well, I think that you can be forgiven for that to the extent that there very often isn't data governance in an organization. And if a CDO role does not exist, it's most probable that the chief technology officer or the chief information officer have data under their portfolio, and it's one of many other tasks that they have to deal with. And so it's typically something that if it does sit under the CTO CIO umbrella, it doesn't get the resources that it really needs in order to thrive. And a lot of that is due to lack of time, lack of talent. And that brings me, though, to something else which you've already all addressed, which is this issue of security. You can't uncouple conversations about cybersecurity from data, because at the end of the day, what are you protecting? You're protecting and securing data. And yet, I still, in most organizations, if there is a CISO, I don't see the CISO working together with the data organization, with the chief data officer, as often as they should be. So really, I think fundamentally, there's still this lack of cross-functional collaboration, and you don't have people who are really uniting the way, for instance, developers and product managers should be in order to ship a product. And we don't have that on the data side yet. That's what the book advocates for. And I do still feel like I have to sell people on that point of view, because if people do know about data governance, they think of it as either a compliance check or something that they have to avoid, because data governance is going to keep them from innovating. And I often think, is that the wrong term to use? Not because the term is incorrect, but because people tune out when you even talk about it. And there is a part of me, I will admit, I published this book in winter 2023, I think within months of ChatGPT becoming mainstream. And I've thought many times to myself, if I had titled this book Designing AI Governance from the Ground Up, I will be haunted by that decision for not to do that for a while, because I wonder if that little change could have yielded a very different response. And that's not to say that the response to the book has been negative. It's actually been, in many cases, the opposite. But I do have to do a lot more explaining of why it's important, whereas everybody wants to know about AI. And I don't need to sell AI, because AI sells itself. So that's the thing. And these are the things, if any of your listeners want to write a book, you have to think about these things, and it's exhausting. I didn't realize how much of a marketer I would have to become when I pitched this book idea.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I have a question about kind of leaning into prioritizing data. Do you think that these companies who are looking at it as sort of something that's going to slow them down, do you think that the solution is really for everyone to start leaning into it? Because let's say you have a company and you're hesitant, but other folks are using your product, or other companies are using all of these other people's companies. If everybody was starting to lean into data compliance and governance, maybe it wouldn't be such a big task. But everybody's being forced to use tools and things that they have to go. It's like, as if I'm thinking about it, like, what if like SOC 2 didn't exist? Like, what if these standardizations for security didn't exist, and every single company who was using another company's tool had to go in and create their own list of questions, like from the scratch? Like, that would be so much harder. But now that everyone's kind of leaned into some of these standardizations of compliance questions, it's a little bit easier on everyone's shoulders. Do you think that would help?
That is one of the core arguments that I make in the book, and that I've made when promoting the book, which is this argument that there is too much data that is produced and ingested today for one person, for one team to manage all of it. You really do need to make data a shared responsibility across the organization. And when I say that, the immediate fear is you're proposing to put even more work on people's plates. And there, in the immediate term, is something to that, because there is always a lot of inherent work in getting something off the ground for the first time. Having said that, the reality is that if you are a leader in an organization in any role, whether it's marketing, sales, customer success, your job, your success in your job depends on data. There is no job today that data does not touch. And the sooner that you can find those data champions in your organization whose job and success in their jobs depends on data, the sooner you can figure out which group of leaders and evangelists you can get together to help co-create those standards for data governance and then automate them in your technology. If this book had a slogan, it would be automate your standards, because the big gap that I see is that there are no data quality standards in the vast majority of organizations. So that, first of all, makes testing impossible, because I've talked to QA engineers at conferences this year when promoting the book, and they've said, I don't even get pass fail conditions for a lot of the data that flows through these pipelines. So I don't even know whether it passes quality checks or not. And I guess that's throwback to the Sauce Labs report on devs behaving badly. People don't even know what quality data looks like, even when their exact job is to do QA. And so you need to define what those standards for quality are per data domain. But then the issue I see is that if those standards exist, and they very rarely do, they are almost never automated into an organization's technology the way that they should be. And that's the biggest disconnect that I see is this notion of data governance as this 60-something page Word doc that was last updated in 2012 and sits on someone's local server, and then whatever they're building in AWS. And the reality is that if your governance standards are not implemented into your environment, they're pointless. They're not doing any good, and they don't exist to benefit your technology, to make your jobs easier for yourself and your colleagues. They don't improve the user experience, and so that's another fundamental gap that I see. And that again is one of the huge arguments that I make in the book, is that if you are a data leader and data is your responsibility, you can't afford not to do this, because the scope of work is just too big for one person.
We've teased this a few times, the topic of AI, and in with its role in data governance. And I was at a party, well, like a meetup, not so recent, like a little bit ago, and the topic of ChatGPT came up, and everybody loves talking about ChatGPT, or one of the others, and not to give that one all the love, but and we were talking about how this guy wrote his like performance reviews for himself now in ChatGPT. And he was talking about all this data that he was putting into ChatGPT. And as we know, like that's not like that's public, right? That's data that's just out there now. And he's like, well, they scraped the internet anyway. They have all that data anyway. They might as well just take it more from me. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But I want to know, like, that's an example. I'm sure there's a million others, but like, what do you think this evolution of AI and where we're going? What's its role going to be in data governance, and what should we be doing? What can we be doing?
Well, I will preface my answer by saying I am not a lawyer, because I that's first of all true. But the other thing, the reason I bring that up is because I've been thinking about what is going to move the needle on these types of issues. And as it pertains to the law, I think it's going to be copyright. I think if we see any success in the short term with halting ChatGPT and the unchecked use of data for training LLMs without any compensation to the creators, it is going to be on the legal grounds of copyright infringement. And I do not know enough about the law, not being a lawyer myself, to know the specifics of how that will work. But I think that is where we are going to see success. We already saw that this year with Samsung, I believe it was, where developers put proprietary Samsung code into ChatGPT, and it is now out there. So those developers freely gave away proprietary Samsung code to the internet, and it's now, and there's no way to get it back because OpenAI owns it now. So I do not know what happened to those developers or where they are now, but that was probably a fatal mistake. I think about this even in the space that I'm in, because I'm a service designer, so I very often lead user interviews because I need to interview customers of real products and services to learn what they like and dislike about those products and services so I can design an improved experience for them. Not only recording those interviews, but then having to read and listen to the transcriptions afterwards to get the nuggets of what was said, that takes hours. I would love to outsource that to a tool like ChatGPT, and I cannot do it because they are telling me things that are not just proprietary, but in the sector that I work in. If I sign, as many of us do, NDAs, I cannot divulge publicly anything that my clients tell and users of my client services tell me. And so there is no way that I could ever use a service like ChatGPT or Otter to transcribe my interviews for me, much as I would like to. And so that brings up the issue of proprietary information and improper disclosure through AI. I don't know offhand of any legal cases that have been brought against people for doing that inadvertently or perhaps on purpose. But if there is going to be consequence for this sort of unchecked data that's used to train LLMs, I think it's going to be in the sphere of copyright infringement and NDA breaches.
Yeah, I think that's on its way. I think that there's going to be, I feel like this is such the beginning, right? We're at the precipice of it, and it's all changing, and it's going to change very fast, as it has been. And soon we're going to start seeing lawsuits, and soon we're going to start seeing people going after big AI.
I think that the actors and writers strikes recently had AI components to them that helped resolve things in a way that is probably going to set some sort of early precedent. And I think that's a positive development.
I agree. I agree. So much of that was about, image and likeness being used. Have any of you watched the first episode of the latest season of Black Mirror? So if people watching this have not watched that episode, it's called Joan is Awful, and it's the first episode in the latest season of Black Mirror. It is all about this scenario. It is, of course, a worst case scenario, and yet it was, I kind of had chills watching the first half hour of it because it was so creepy and yet felt so plausible. And it's all, and I mean, again, it goes back to this issue of using consumer data, which you freely sign away, to then create new fake content that using someone's likeness or image. And then the episode explores it in a really entertaining way that ends up, in my opinion, being pretty funny. But the first 20-30 minutes of it were really disturbing to me because, again, it's meant to be showing a worst case scenario that's very out there. It didn't feel very out there to me.
It didn't. It really didn't. And I think we might have actually mentioned that episode before on this podcast. I have friends in the television industry, and they're very threatened by AI. Not just for the content that it's producing, but also the likeness of actors and things like that. And there's so many questions regarding that. And yeah, I mean, gosh, we could talk about this topic forever. I feel like, and that's like a whole series of podcasts.
Yeah, and it gets very existential very quickly because I mean, what we're talking about is the essence of creativity and literal discussions of what is real versus what is perceived versus what is fake. This is something that is hugely top of mind for me ahead of the presidential election next year. It's something that I don't, as somebody who lives in Washington, D.C., want to think about too much. And yet I feel like I have to because it is just getting easier and easier to, again, generative AI means you generate new content. It's not as simple anymore as using machine learning to analyze massive amounts of data and then make accurate predictions about what is going to happen in the future. It's about creating new content that is not real, but it's incredibly hard to decipher even for a media literate person, which many people are not to the degree that they should be when it comes to digital media. So I think when we talk about consequences of the lack of data governance, the worst case scenario is what we're talking about. And I find that humans are very reactive people. We tend to come up with solutions to problems after there's been a catastrophe of some sort. And I think that we, as a collective tech group, will address this. I think in some cases we will address it too late after there has been some type of catastrophe. We saw this happen with security. The analogy that I've been using this year is that I attended the Open Source Summit in Vancouver 5 years ago in 2018. And there's a single mention of cybersecurity. Everybody was talking about Kubernetes and containers, and nobody wanted to talk about open source security and why it mattered. And 5 years later, at the same conference, at the same venue in Vancouver this year, the Linux Foundation launched the OpenSSF project, which is all about open source security. Why? There are many reasons for that, but a lot of people at that conference have had to work over Christmas many times because of unhinged breaches. And so it's so we do address things as a tech industry, as a society, but we're reactive by nature. And I think it's going to take something really widespread and really unfortunate to get people to really take us seriously the way that they should be.
I totally agree. That's a really great place, I feel like, to end it. That was the exclamation point. Lauren Maffeo, thank you so much for coming on. We really loved having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I would love to be back, and I hope that I'll see you all at conferences in 2024
Absolutely.
again, because this was awesome.
Yeah, and the book is Designing Data Governance from the Ground Up. And where can we get it?
Yep. So it's called Designing Data Governance from the Ground Up, and you can get it from the Pragmatic Programmers, my publisher. So you can go to pragprog.com, pragprog.com, and you can get the book there in print, audio, or e-reader format. You can also purchase it through your local bookstores. It's available at Target and Amazon, and I would love for folks to read it and then also to leave reviews on sites like Amazon and Goodreads. Those reviews really make a difference in terms of searchability and making it easier for folks to find the book. So I would love for people who enjoyed this conversation to check it out and then let me know what you think online.
Amazing. Yes, definitely go pick up a copy. And Lauren, we'll definitely have to have you come back and we could dive even further into the AI conversation, because I think we left some more on the table there, and it would be great to have you come on again in the future.
I will come on at any time. Just say
Awesome.
when.
Awesome. And thank you so much for giving us your time and listening to another episode of Test Case Scenario. We had a blast. We probably had more fun than you did listening, but I hope you had as much fun. I always say that, but in reality, it's so much fun recording these. And we will come back to you on the next episode. Until then, we'll see you. Take care. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.